videoed it earlier on when the sun wasn't already setting, but I just screwed up and lost some footage, so let's try again. Today, on the cliffside, we're going to talk about how, as the train goes by, to protect your cliffside from landslide, cultivate cliff areas, and retain your view. And I have several items of input that I can provide. I kind of hope this train isn't too long, because golly, they end up being loud little buggers. But, you know, we'll see how that goes. So as you can see, it's a very snowy day. We still have quite a bit of snow, but we have the solar gain of a south-facing slope in the wintertime. Choo-choo! And a south-facing slope in the wintertime has such a solar gain that it allows for adding one more growing zone to your existing numbers. So I'm zone 6B, and it is safe to assume, as the crows fly overhead, that this is more likely zone 7B in the areas where the sun is hitting. You can very much see the difference between where the sun is hitting. That's a lot of train. I'm sorry about the train noise. I know a lot of my viewers like the train though, so I'm not too sorry for the train. Fuck. I'm under attack by plants. So we're down here, and I have been cultivating this cliffside from its original state of simply being a blanket of very well developed poison ivy, which, yeah, it's a native plant, but whoo, it's not a desirable one. Ooh, I was so allergic to it, really wasn't helpful. I'm the kind of person, well, not anymore because I take Rust Toxica, but originally I was the kind of person that if I opened the window and the wind blew the wrong way, I could get poison ivy rash. So, Rust Toxica is available as it's an extract from the plant itself in a very micro dose, and you can put it under your tongue and it increases your immunity. There goes the tail end of the train. It should get quieter now. So there are a lot of things that I'm doing down here, a lot of detail, and a lot of things that I've witnessed over the 17 years of keeping this cliff that I'd like to share with you as much as I can today. This is probably going to be a relatively long form video because there's a lot to say. And I can also compare it to the landslide that did happen 3 doors down. The trees go to about here. The snow is the far edge of it. That speckle of snow is the far edge of the landslide. And it's a 220-foot sheer drop of just bare soil that I have been working on seeding out, and plan eventually to also do a lot of what I'm doing here over there, just on a much more subtle scale. One that's less, you know, noticeable from 3 miles away. Because you can tell I'm doing stuff from over there. And that's probably not great if it's not actually mine. I don't really want to get caught, but I also do want to reinstate life on the landslide and perhaps make it even more of a useful space than it already is. Been introducing edible and useful native plants over there because I'd like to compete, and there's a lot of those. So the more the merrier, because there's a lot of that lacking from Pittsburgh. So the first thing I want to mention, and what was the actual catalyst of that landslide, was twofold over there. One of them, we can see an example of the risk. I think my camera is perfectly level right now. One of them is, Do you see how this tree is growing originally like this and then up? That tree gains more tilt every year. And I do expect it to fall, pull its root ball with it, and go. Now, what happened over here when that did happen is it fell, took its root ball with it, and the weight of it gained momentum. The ground started shaking, the rest of the tree's root systems let go, and the entire 220-foot rise of trees all released and ended up at a pile at the bottom of the cliff. So, my take home from that is that very large trees can be a liability. I know that mine is as well. On a cliff, they can be a liability. I know that mine is as well because this lateral branch, it has been causing vertical fissures. Now, having a tree fall apart and crush things around it by branch is a lot less destructive to the cliff side than what's likely to happen with that one over there. I've been increasing the root mass between me and that tree dramatically over the last 3 years because that tilt is somewhat new. That hasn't always been like that, so it's rather short-term concerning rather than long-term concerning. At this point, I feel like it's probably closer than it is farther away, if that makes sense. So, one thing you want to make sure is that a lot of good, strong root masses that don't have a ton of momentum behind them are in place. And the way that I enact that on this cliffside is through something called pollarding. You see how this tree goes up, stops, and then there's a bunch of little branches? Same here. This is about chest height where I cut it, and it had been probably 40 or 50 foot tall prior to that. It was a very tall tree, and this just so happens to be American elm. And American elm doesn't care what you do to it. It is a stubborn little bugger. So I'm continuing to do that. I do thin out the branches and use them. I use them as supports on the retainer wall area, which we'll talk about in more detail towards the end, because that is specifically if you're planning on cultivating your hill. I think a lot of people are just looking at how do I keep from losing my land down the hill, especially when you have, I mean, what is it? It's more than a 40, it's steeper than a 45-degree angle here. And so I think for the most part, you want to keep your concerns at not causing landslides first, and then expand into potentials of cultivation after. So that's the first thing that I do, is I do a lot of pollarding. I focus on having trees that do well with being cut and regrowing. That includes sumac, that includes black walnut. I am introducing buffalo currant down here, which is a very rhizomatically spreading plant. And the existing sumac trees, I'm cutting them, which does encourage them to pop up new growth all over the place, which is really, really nice. Oaks don't mind. Celtis trees don't mind. The hazelnut family doesn't mind at all. I've also, specifically, there is one tree that's very invasive to this area, and the tufts in the air right there are an example of it. I am trying to remove those. This is a male variety of it. That one's female, and I need to go get at it too, but I can't right now because I'll fall down the cliff. Do consider your safety. yeah, so I'm trying to get after the female ones especially, and just generally trying to keep them shorter rather than taller. But they do exude a toxin into the ground, and it is good to know which trees exude toxins that a lot of the plants in your area don't have tolerances for. So black walnut is native to my area, and a lot of the plants in my area are perfectly tolerant of it, and it will grow back no matter how many times you cut it, but it does release more of the toxins each time you cut it, whereas very few plants in my area are tolerant to the TOH. Tree of Heaven is what it's called, but it is more of hell than heaven. So I've been working on trying to remove a lot of those, especially the ones that are seed bearing, because boy do they seed out. There's here, 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 there. Excuse me. So leaving as much root mass in place as possible, though, is gonna be the highest priority. And if you can stimulate additional root mass growth, for example, black walnuts do sucker, and that can, if you cut, then it might spur them to grow out and widen their net. So think of the root mass underground as a net holding in your hillside, and the more netting, the more netting and the more variety of net material that is in place under the ground from these large trees, the better. The next best thing then are the small shrubs. I actually, for the most part, have natives down here, but I do allow this naturalized goji to continue growing. It's got a good root mass too, and it just already is everywhere, so I may as well let it, is my theory. And for the invasives that I am removing, I'm removing them very carefully and methodically. As you can tell, pollarding allows for seeing over the trees. So my then replacement tree goals is I am planting things that grow to a height that reaches the level above. So throughout here, I'm planting things that will grow 5 foot maximum. And then throughout here, these are all pots that I can lift in and out. But I also want to plant through here trees that will grow 12 foot maybe maximum. Tree, shrub, that's the gray area zone. There's plenty of plants that do that. Or trees that I, just like this American elm, will be pollarding. And that'll continue along here. And then down here, it'll be things that get to be about 20 foot tall. And if I can ever cultivate the lower edge, because that is indeed a sheer cliffside drop at the edge there, round about where this V is, it turns into a rock face that's undercut, and if you went off the edge, you'd fall about 60 feet. So without climbing gear, I can't really care for things down there, and it's still quite dry down there, so I don't expect to necessarily cultivate down there, but the trees that are growing can get their full height down there because they're not blocking the view, because they can get to be about 50 foot tall. And this is a little bit above the view, right? But I can still see past them from up top. So that is view retention through trimming and height selection. Now, if you're going to be this intensive about things, you might want, like me, to install stairwells. And I am going to link for you below, and I'll probably put it as the playlist at the end, or maybe I'll use my one that is Terracing the Cliff full playlist so you can see this in its original form, but I'll link them both below in the description. It's before I was as good with cameras, and the next time I do one I'll improve and there'll be a better quality one, but I do have a how to install a tire stairwell playlist that I'll link below. And go ahead and expand the description and go find that. So I do have the instructions on how to do this, and then it's real easy to just get up and down. Now, at first I did have to climb, and I would tie a rope up here and I'd hang on. And for the lower areas, it's much more dangerous, so I have full climbing gear to get down there. And over there, sometimes I'm a little reckless because there's not a sheer drop cliff over there. It's just like I would slide for 220 feet and then end up in somebody's yard at the bottom, which wouldn't be great, but it's not nearly as dangerous as my section right here. So even just these little herbaceous things that have tiny little root systems, all of it is highly functional for holding in the soil. You don't want to weed unless you have something to catch that afterwards. So if you're looking at a cliffside in your area, pollarding is a very good start. Assessing trees that have lean for their risk to the rest of the cliffside is a really good start. Pollarding, again, is this cutting at chest height and letting it regrow. I would caution against things like English ivy. I have seen English ivy kill and just absolutely decimate entire hillsides, entire pieces of forest, because they choke out the trees and the trees die. It has good root mass, but at what cost? That's only a surface root mass. That is not a depth root mass, and you want the trees to have their root mass too. That's very important to have tree root mass because they're the strongest net underneath the soil. Now, if you have all of that covered, then you can take a look at, do you want to cultivate for food or financial gain? And here's how I'm doing that. I have a very, very low cost version of terracing installed, which we've looked at briefly. This is one of the newest ones here, and it's not finished. Like, it tapers down, and it's like the infrastructure's for it down there, but it's not actually started on the far end. So here you can see these are called U-posts. They're like T-posts. Either is fine. It's just T-posts are usually taller if you're searching for them at a hardware store website, and since most everything is order for pickup these days, we're still mid-pandemic as I record this, then it is useful to know the name of things very specifically, because looking them up online can be tricky if you don't know the actual words. I just drove these 3-foot T-posts as far into the ground using a wooden mallet, specifically because I don't want to bust open the paint that's keeping the rust out. I use a wooden mallet to do these things. And all of these are 3 feet. They just are pounded in as far as I possibly could get them to go. And I'll continue to hit on a couple of these because this is now up high enough. So I first pound in the stakes, and then like down here you can see the stakes are there, and there's like one bit of wood going across. And I line up the stakes based on the lowest piece of wood going across. After that, I push some soil against it, then I put another line of sticks, and then I push some soil against that, another line of sticks. And I'm pulling the soil from above, and that is creating my walkway. And this is creating the catch. Now this is mulched, and there's wild garlic here, and my plan is to get enough root mass in these that by the time the wood starts to break down and not be as good at holding up the soil anymore, I'm ready to go because the soil is so well held in by the roots. And I also might be able to pull the posts and place in wood again, or slide wood down in front of it we haven't gotten to the point where any of these have broken down yet, and I believe I'm 5 years in on the oldest one. Now it is starting to tilt, that one. But also I didn't know that it would do that and hadn't designed properly for it. So if you are going to be cultivating your hillside, I recommend having a soil catch trough, also known as a terrace, in place ready to go before you start to dig. Anything that you're going to plant down here, you should plant by seed and minimal soil disturbance until you have infrastructure set up. And do keep an eye on your big trees, because it is my experience with a cliff this steep, and exactly what happened down there. The one tree caught a big gust of wind. It was like 120 foot tall, caught a big gust of wind, and it started to fall, and its roots tore out, and then it gained momentum due to the weight of the full plant was just immense. It started knocking trees below it down. It rumbled the earth, it loosened up all the root mass, and now we have a sheer 220 foot rise that was full of trees 2 years ago and is void of life except what I planted there now. So I do hope that this is helpful. Keep an eye on your big trees, pollard some things. If you want your view, go ahead down and pollard at chest height or so. Do just a few pollards at a time, so that if, like my maple down there, it doesn't like it, then you know, okay, that tree is a little more fragile. Maybe look into the best time of year to cut each variety of trees so you don't cause them more damage than necessary by shortening them like this. Just do it a little bit at a time, really gentle. Don't dig into the soil until you're ready. Cast as many seeds as you like, and select varieties that are going to spread their root mass through the soil and really anchor your cliffside to its location rather than risk it running away. I hope that's all been helpful. I thank you for visiting the cliffside. This has been Permaculture, and there goes the sunset. I always enjoy a good sunset. I hope you're having a good one. Take care. Bye.